this country fairly well, having been involved back then in Novomatic to set up a new construction site in Krakow.
Software engineering, so as part of the team, using and building up the Polish team in Krakow.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you, dziękuję bardzo, also for doing that back then.
Proszę bardzo.
Thank you. Now, what we're going to cover are more or less the following three themes. What is the role of testing houses? What can they do realistically? What can they not do? We're going to look at smart regulation. And finally, you can expect some free of charge hints by a representative of a testing house in terms of where things go right and where things go wrong in testing products from operators. Wonderful. So let's start with our first point then, the role of testing houses. Now, let us first take stock and look back a few more years than just one or two. Let's look back 15, 20 years. Where does testing come from in the land-based? You know, what did testing houses used to do in the land-based field? How did that look?
Well, historically, you had actually the first casino markets, or land-based casino markets, are regulated, also technically. I would say this started in Australia, Victoria, then also very early in the US, New Jersey, then Las Vegas, of course, and then also South Africa. And it went along with also difficulties the industry was already facing in the past in these segments. So we had, everybody knows, we had organized crime in Las Vegas involved from the beginning, then also manipulated machines, gaming machines, manipulated products. And this is where our regulators had to set action, and our independent testing labs really become a partner of regulators, but also for the industry, to regulate the market, clean the market with fair products.
So like cleaning, to come back to a credible.
Exactly. Yes. So also the fair play was actually in the focus, so that you had first limits on our return to player. You had also our testing of randomness included. Then you had, of course, first regulative measures, what needs to be displayed by a game, what information needs to be available for the player.
So in essence, the start, and if we look at the mob in Las Vegas, was very much to reassure against the audience and the general public that these machines are reliable.
Exactly.
Yeah, and not just crooked machines.
Exactly, yeah, because you had already the original casinos were starting with table game, live table game. There you had already manipulations, of course, with roulette wheels and stuff like that. And then it was actually to ensure the players and the industry that the game is fair and reliable.
Let me touch right away on why testing houses are needed. So I could raise the question, why would the operators not test that? Why would the regulator not test this?
Well, first, you have so many individual jurisdictions, and we heard already today about Spain with its 17 jurisdictions. The same we have in Germany with our 15 or 16 jurisdictions, or Switzerland and Austria with 9 or 10. So we would have many regulators not coordinated and with a minimum on staff are trying to follow up a technical worldwide global development.
Impossible, as we know.
Impossible, actually, and also to submit to each individual regulator, this would be very time and cost intensive.
I would also assume there's certain technical know-how.
Exactly. Of course, mainly the regulators are legal staff or with limited technical knowledge, and if I think it's more a modern development where you have also now our engineers and technicians joining the regulators team. So Switzerland, for example, was always the ESBK as regulator, a mix of legal but also technical people included and involved with the technical understanding.
Thank you. Let's now look, when you mentioned this very limited scope in a way, the early days of testing and the land-based, now we look how things are in the land-based and online in testing. The scope must have dramatically expanded. What is being tested and testable. Can you walk us through this? How has this developed over the years? What was added over the years?
Well, actually it started all with our let's say, the hardware of machines, so construction. So you had also our mechatronic background people in the teams, or mechanics actually, or constructors and stuff like that, taking care about the hardware. Then it was peripheral devices such as cash devices, banknote acceptors, stuff like that. And everything was focused on the single machine. Yeah, software side, you had a local RNG, actually easy algorithms in the past compared to what we call in a decent RNG today. Then you had the game math was very simple to the game content. Today, maybe what describes the math model of a game is the so-called par sheet information. This actually is the description, the math description of a game you play in a casino. In the past, I would say 15, 20 years ago, our par sheet, the math description of a game was taking, I would say, 5 to 10 pages. Nowadays,
it's a bit different now.
Yeah, it's between 100 and 150 pages. The math model only from a complex game that has skill elements or progressive elements implemented. Yeah.
And then yes, I would reckon when it comes to online cybersecurity, this is a whole big domain in itself.
Yeah,
so
actually, GLI has acquired a dedicated company, Bulletproof. Yeah, to cover this point. It was also on the radar then of the regulators, the ISO 27001 standard, plus vulnerability and penetration testing. This was added to existing regulations, also based on discussions the regulators had with regulators, or bad experiences they made from praxis. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Plus server-based gaming already led to a different level.
I remember you were involved in the early days at Novomatic as well, GreenTube then, to actually develop a server-based solution, right? Now, if I try to summarize all this, if we condense it down, what really, in essence, is the role of testing houses? What needs to be done? I would think it's the measuring. You measure, and you provide a result out of the measure.
Well, first, serious testing houses should be, and they're all actually ISO certified. So ISO 17025 is the standard for testing. Then you have also 17020 for inspections. So we need to follow an ISO accreditation and certification process. We need to prove that we can prove. And,
exactly. So sticking with that, who is your godfather then? You know, you're the godfather of the industry. You test the industry, but who is approving you?
Oh, well, it's the accreditation bodies, the local ones. So every single lab of ITLs depends on the jurisdiction it is located, the country it is located. Every country has an accreditation body, and we have annual audits where we receive keep our certification, or we have to improve.
So Alex, how does it feel when the tester gets tested?
It's not funny at all, I can tell you. So it's really always, every year, a stressful moment. Because sometimes also the accreditation bodies have maybe not that experience with certifying testing labs from the gaming industry. Yeah. Then actually all the labs you have around in Europe do not only cover one market, they cover international markets. And especially all European markets, yeah, and also the scope is dynamically growing, yeah, and you have to prove the test house that your methods are really lead to the result they want to see under ISO criteria, yeah. So this means that the test house receives also the source code information or partial information of the operators, suppliers, yeah, or sometimes the operator is also supplier, or sometimes the operator is just an operator. Yeah. So mainly the submitting party is the supplier, because it's the party that is in the that keeps the intellectual property.
Okay, so you have a funny role in that you are in between the industry and the authorities. You seem to fulfill a semi-public task, duty. You test, certify, you provide evidence that what the operators claim is actually accurate. You fulfill a semi-public role, at the same time you're not the regulator. Maybe you can try to deviate what can you realistically not be expected to do. What remains with the regulator?
Unfortunately, I'm not a regulator.
So what is the regulator's task which testing house simply cannot do?
It's the regulator actually that needs to create the basis for the business. This means the regulator needs to define the limits. We can only tell him what limits he needs, what parameters, but what are the numbers in these limits? This is up to the regulator. Yeah. We often are confronted also with the situation where the regulator is very demanding. This is where I mentioned the interstate treaty, for example, where they were asking for AI-based and AI technology-supported tools for responsible gaming by each operator. But the reality is this is technically not possible. Yeah. So in the best case, the lab is in contact with the supplying party, the operators, and the regulator to guarantee best possible technical regulation in line with the gaming law. And in the best case, already in the gaming law phase, when defining the law, the industry and the ITLs are included to stem the best possible regulation.
Absolutely. So there needs to be a close communication between the regulator, industry, and you are really the bridge in between. I just remember on this occasion that somebody from a long-standing management member of your company now has become a regulator, right? Kevin Mullally, who became now the executive director in the Emirates of the regulatory authority there. A big job, but certainly an excellent background.
I'm not jealous.
But certainly an excellent background to bring to the job. Yeah. Now, our second theme was regulation. Now, I'm struck over many years. I keep noticing that jurisdictions, especially regulators, they like to pride themselves saying, we have the strictest regulation. We have the strictest regulation in gaming. And sometimes that is combined with statements as, we are tough on the industry. I've always wondered, is this a sound thing to achieve? would it not rather be smart regulation instead of strict regulation? And I can't help identifying the parallel between what Charles Darwin and Huxley and other evolutionary biologists described as not the survival of the strongest, but the survival of the fittest, which is definitely not the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, let's speak about smart regulation as opposed to maybe tough or strict regulation. What are your experiences? What have you observed? Does it need to be strict, or should it be smart? And have you encountered examples of smart regulation?
Strict and smart doesn't exclude itself, I would say. But when we look at the history in the land-based segment, yeah, the toughest and strictest jurisdictions, let's say, are Victoria in Australia, which is even called the nanny state by the Australians themselves. Or Nevada actually has a very strict technical regulation as well. We need to be careful that on the first side, this might look be a good thing, and even for a certain period of time this works. It works until you have new steps in technology, like online, when you have, or the PC platform was already bringing markets like Australia and Nevada, so the US manufacturing industry, under pressure. And then we actually end up in a kind, and the biggest risk that it ends up in a kind of protectionism. That you have a well-established industry. The UK was also such a good example, where everything was running fine within the UK. It was a more or less isolated market. You see this also in Germany.
You're referring to the land-based, right? Where you had a couple of important players provisioning the industry.
Yeah. And once online came in, and what happened? Yeah, they were all shocked. They were all out of game. They were not participating in this industry. They were not part of this industry.
They were not competitive.
Exactly, and then they were not competitive. Yeah.
What about, you mentioned Australia? What was the situation there? You also had a couple of dominant players. Right?
Yeah, in Australia you actually had two very dominant manufacturers and a few smaller ones that actually, funny-wise, this is already decades ago, had also a very strict technical defined standard, which was also linked to a patent solution for a memory storage device. Yeah, so it was actually impossible for other European or even US manufacturers to enter the market without breaking this patent. Yeah, what in the end led to the fact that you had these two manufacturers dominating the market, but they lost actually ground on international basis and on international markets.
And the ultimate disruptive moment was definitely online, where they were simply not adapted to it.
Where the funny thing is that actually the first online standard was developed by an Australian lab. Yeah, so it's also that I see the important part for the labs also to constantly stay in touch with the industry, to pick up new technology, and to help the industry to technically regulate it, so that a regulator and first regulators can adapt these standards and take them over. This is, for example, what took place in Denmark, and also the UK. In the past, the UKGC, together with labs, have defined a testing strategy in line with the gaming law. This is also where we started with Birgitte Sand at the time in Denmark, where the first regulation in Denmark, we recognized a lot of mistakes in the certain random number generators were not random, and of course this caused also the Danish regulator to protest and also to debate this and discuss this with the labs. Actually, I remember Birgitte Sand was not very amused at that time. Yeah, and I was sitting on the table, and then I had to explain, Birgitte, you have now a really good law, you have a really right approach, but we miss our technical standards for the industry so that you can control and monitor your market in the best way.
You have now mentioned a couple of examples. Maybe you can use also Switzerland as an example to illustrate. GLI develops their own gaps, GLI 11, GLI newer edition.
Actually, the GLI standard series.
GLI standard series, right?
Yep.
And they are public. You can download them, you can look at them online, you can download them and use them. It's publicly provided by GLI. You mentioned in our pre-discussion that the technical standards in Switzerland are very, very close to exactly the GLI standard. Can you briefly elaborate on that and maybe where there was just some fine-tuning?
Well, it's actually that we do not design and these GLI standards. They're called GLI standards, but it's not something where you think there's something like a deep lab, where we develop these standards. No, that's not the case. It's actually every standard, every GLI standard on one of the first pages is listing the jurisdictions it was influenced by. So actually what we do with a GLI standard is we eliminate all the legal topics like limits and stuff like that, we just keep the parameters in, and when you develop, for example, an online platform and games after the GLI 19 standard, you would, or a gaming machine after GLI 11, you would cover already, I would say, 80 to 90% of the worldwide markets. And then this is actually every lab is doing, every ITL can test against the standards, so this is not a privilege or monopoly of GLI. And then every lab actually creates so-called gap lists, and then we only test against this jurisdiction-specific, the target market-specific requirements.
Okay.
So this means, as a developer, I develop a machine after GLI 11, and for Switzerland, then I have a GLI 11 testing report, and then I ask the lab to make a transfer to Switzerland, Nevada, California, and then it's actually just the gap testing to issue jurisdictional reports for the ESPK and the other dedicated regulators. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you so much. I promised, being conscious of time, that we are approaching our final theme, which is, as I promised, some free hints to the industry where things might go wrong in the testing. So when you, from all the testing experience you have over many years, you must have noted certain things just, they keep going wrong.
Yeah.
You can't approve them, you can't certify them. What are the classes?
Well, it's for let's say for beginners in the industry, it's always hard because often they come from an unregulated market background, and then think what works in their market is easy to work in international regulated markets. This is actually a naive thinking, I need to say, and if they then submit already into the lab totally unprepared, not even having read the regulation of the target market, then it fails dramatically already in the early testing phase. We also need to say, and this doesn't really exclude such typical errors, do not exclude even big players, because big players are confronted with a complex new development scenery. When we are talking about big online operators, this is not all happening in-house anymore. So actually they are supplied by a platform supplier, they have content suppliers, the content suppliers have already game studios developing games.
Large operators have become very complex.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have many chefs in the kitchen,
and too many cooks that can spoil the recipe. I believe to understand from you that return to player is
correct.
Is a classic problem.
It's a classic problem because you have the math guys are creating this math model. And once they have finished, they pass it on to the software engineers, programmers. Programmers and math guys, let's say, we're not friends. We try to understand each other. So actually, programmer has to implement this math model. And what happens very often is that there is no cross-check anymore. This is actually where before I, as a software engineer and programmer, have to do this discussion and code review together with the math guy, I rather send it to the lab to get the feedback from there what we have made wrong. Yes, and it's really often the case.
And you like to portray the programmers as the creative ones, the authors, the writers.
Exactly.
The brains. But there might be a lack of double checking afterwards by the grammar guys, the mathematicians.
We call this actually white box testing. Yeah, this is actually code review or with the expert if the math model has been implemented correctly in your source code. Now you have to know that many math people are also not programmers. Yes, so they don't understand the code, or you think, or you have even made it better than the math guy itself. In the lab, then the awful truth comes up because every lab has a math department, which is also has code readers included, and they do actually the analysis together. And then you also have an emulator test where every game is actually passing 10 billion test runs based on the game math, and then you actually detect the mistakes at a quite early stage.
So if you don't employ the mathematicians in-house, then you will have the reality check then with the testing house.
Even in-house, it's just the problem is maybe smaller because you produce smaller amounts, and the risk level is closer, but even in-house you have this risk factor.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. Slowly wrapping it up, maybe a last question. Is there, in your view, a European perspective on gaming regulation, a pan-European look at things, and is this achievable, such a perspective? Is it achievable in practice, and if not, what stands in the way?
It's actually easier than we think, and it's actually already taking place. From a lab perspective, I see it like an operator, not only on one market focused, but when we look at online, for example, we have a much unified technical regulation already compared to land-based. In online, it's the UK, then Denmark, Sweden, probably Finland will follow, Switzerland the same. So actually this is more or less unified from technical perspective. Also Greece is G19, for example, and this is where I see actually in the online sector, the technical standards are already more or less on a European way and European level. It's of course other jurisdictions that still are not on that level or have where I do not want to blame the regulators for. This is from country to country. Gambling has also a different background. If you look at France, Belgium, Germany, with the state casinos, a more or less isolated market, or Austria itself with a monopoly that dates back to the empire days. I think we cannot expect them to major or develop in the same way as a new market. For example, the fastest and best regulated markets are in the Nordic region, where you had no gambling taking place or allowed in the past, and in the former Eastern jurisdictions that are are completely new. Yeah, you also have new regulators, new regular teams, modern people, young people.
The possibility to start from scratch.
Exactly, and this is also very interesting to follow the suppliers and operators located in these markets. For example, Slovenia was one of the first, and this even technically one of the strictest regulated markets. And this helped the local industry to catch up and to develop very fast. And even nowadays in Slovenia, the Interblock, it's not a secret, yeah, it's a Slovenian small company. I know this company since it started in a garage, and it's when we're talking about electronic table games in the land-based casino sector, they have now, I think, market coverage in the US of 90%.
Yeah, that's impressive.
So, and this developed in 15 years,
15 years.
Yeah, or EGD in Bulgaria. Yeah.
Thank you, Alexander. It has been a pleasure covering with you the role of testing houses, sound and smart regulation versus tough regulation, and finally also some very valuable insights and hints for the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the chance, dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you.